Hi, this is Greg Standen, and thank you for tuning in to the NDIS Marketing Podcast. Did you know that you are just one of over 4,800 providers in New South Wales and over 18,449 providers Australia-wide, trying to assist 554,917 participants on the NDIS in Australia as of the 11th of January 2023? This podcast aims to uncover some of the obstacles NDIS providers and participants face when looking for carers to provide the care that participants require. We will also look at some of the ways that NDIS service providers can better market themselves to the NDIS community. Hey everybody, welcome to the NDIS Marketing Podcast, the podcast where you get all your marketing advice from what is marketing to how to implement marketing strategies. And in previous episodes, we've covered off on things like what is marketing, how to identify your target audience, and then we've started to look at some various tactics in ways in which you can get your message out to your target audience. And last week we covered off on voiceover with Lee Hatcher, and I'd encourage you to go back and listen to that episode, or you can even watch the video on YouTube, or access that on our website. And that leads into today's episode, where we have Erik K Johnson, and Erik K Johnson is the podcast talent coach. He's from Omaha, Nebraska in the United States, and he's been number 1 and number 2 over the last 10 years on a local radio station over there. Also the top 2 for 9 out of 11 ratings seasons, and been in radio and podcasting for 28 years. Welcome, Erik.
Thank you very much, Greg. Happy to be here.
So, Erik, just give us a little bit of a rundown on yourself. Why would people want to listen to this episode of the NDIS Marketing Podcast? Why Erik, and why would they want to go to you for advice on this?
Absolutely. Well, you know how a lot of podcasters launch their podcast and they get about 7 or 8 episodes in, and then they throw in the towel and they give up because they don't know where to go. They go, okay, I got to launch. Now what? Well, that's kind of where I come in. I help them craft their message. I help them transform their information into engaging entertainment so they can create these powerful, profitable relationships with their audience and really lead their audience to that next step of doing business with them. I help them use their podcast as a powerful marketing tool for their business. I got started in radio back in 1988, 1989-ish. And as I was getting my degree in architecture, I finished the degree in architecture and just stayed in radio because I loved what it was all about. And I programmed radio stations. I was on the radio in every day part. I did overnights. I've done nights. I've done afternoons. I've done mornings. I've done middays. I've done it all. And I programmed in a variety of formats and learned how to develop target audiences and your ideal listener and attract an audience, entertain that audience, and more importantly, inspire that audience to take action and do business with our clients. And so that's what I help podcasters do. Around 2009, I fell in love with podcasting and really fell in love with the genre and the open nature of it, where you could really create content, that any content you wanted on your show. And it was like the Wild West. It was like the old days of radio, where you could do whatever you wanted on your show. And as I listened to those podcasts, I thought, man, if they knew some of the tactics we used in radio to hook an audience and to capture their attention and really engage with the audience, these shows could be so much more effective and so much more powerful. And so in 2013, I started coaching podcasters to really create some effective, powerful content for their shows and really help use the podcast to grow their business. And that was the birth of Podcast Talent Coach, and that's what I've been doing since.
Right. That's fantastic. Now, you mentioned there you've worked various times on radio, when back in your radio days, you've worked mornings, you've worked day, evenings, and overnights as well. How does timing sort of fit into podcasting?
So timing, the great thing about podcasting is that it's on demand. People can listen whenever they want. I get a lot of podcasters that say, Eric, what's the best day to release my podcast? What time of day should I release it, publish it, put it out to the world? And the answer is it doesn't really matter because people aren't listening in real time like they're listening on the radio. They're listening when they want to listen. So some people might listen to your show Thursday nights. Others might listen Saturday mornings while they're out running. Some might listen Thursday afternoons while they're mowing the yard. Who knows? The best thing is they can listen whenever they want, and they can listen 2 weeks from now if they wanted to. It's time shifted and it's on demand. The important part is to publish it consistently and be there and develop that trust with your audience that you're going to be there when they expect it to be there. If they are listening every Thursday night, then you should be there every Thursday night with a fresh episode. Now, that episode could have been released Monday morning. It doesn't matter what day you release or what time you release. Just try and do it at the same day and time every week. So when they're ready to listen, your content is there.
Right. Yeah. So let's just backtrack for a bit. We've talked a lot about podcasting and and this whole episode is about podcasting and how NDIS providers or providers within the disability space can actually use podcasting. So break it down for us, Eric. What is podcasting exactly?
A lot of people think podcasting is simply taking a audio file and posting it up on your website. That's not really a podcast. A lot of people tell me, oh, yeah, I have a podcast. It's on YouTube. That's not really a podcast either. What defines the podcast is the fact that somebody can subscribe to your podcast through an RSS feed. RSS stands for Real Simple Syndication. It simply means that you can click the subscribe button on the podcast, and then every time a new episode is published, it shows up in your podcast feed because you are subscribed to it. You're subscribed through that RSS feed. RSS feeds were very popular with blogging before podcasting really became a thing. And a lot of people would subscribe to blogs through an RSS feed. And every time a new blog post would be published, it would show up in your feed because you're following that feed. So a podcast is really distributed through an RSS feed. An RSS feed, so you have an audio host when you publish your podcast. An audio host is like a storage unit for all of your audio. You record your shows and then you put it into this storage unit. And you take that address of the storage unit and you give that to all of the podcast players like Apple Podcasts or Spotify or iHeartRadio or any of the others. You tell them what your address is. And all of those players ping your storage unit about every 5 minutes to see if there's anything new. And when they find something new, they ingest it into their player. So all you have to do is take your address, which is your RSS feed, and give it to all of the podcast players. So I'll give my RSS feed to Apple. Now Apple pings my audio host every 5 minutes or so. When they see a new episode, Apple ingests that into Apple Podcasts so everybody can listen to it. You only do that one time. So you don't have to take your podcast and give it to all of the different players. You just put it in your audio host. They already know your address because you told them what your address is. So they just watch for new stuff and it shows up in the feed. Makes it super easy. That is what defines a podcast.
So this is all great. You're talking about RSS feeds and how people actually get to listen to my podcast. That's all fantastic. I'm getting listeners that are actually eventually going to hear my message and get it's allowing me to get my word out there, and then eventually, hopefully, they're going to do business with me. But I hear people going, "But Eric, there's a lot of must be a lot of steps before that. So how do I start a podcast?"
Starting a podcast is really pretty easy. There's 6 steps to starting your podcast. The first one is to lay the foundation, which is your purpose, your why. Why is it that you want to start the podcast? Who do you want to attract, and why do you want to attract them? So you lay your purpose down first, and then you figure out what your programming is going to be. The programming that is your content. What is it you're going to talk about? What's your topic? What's your niche? And then you determine the platform. Are you going to do a solo show, an interview style show? Is it a co-hosted show? What does the structure of the podcast look like? So your purpose, your programming, and your platform, those form the foundation of your podcast. And once you've determined that, then you just simply need to produce the show, which is record it, edit it, and export it. You need to publish the show, upload it to your audio host, and then you need to get out and promote your show, which is tell the whole world that it exists and get them to come and listen. So in order to create a podcast, you need a microphone, which you can usually get fairly inexpensively. Get a USB microphone that plugs right into your computer. That costs about $70 US. And it's not all that expensive. You'll need a computer, and you'll need a set of headphones or earbuds, which you probably have laying around the house somewhere. And then you'll need some audio editing software. I like Audacity. It's free. You can download that for free right onto your computer, and now you're set. And then in order to publish it, you're going to need an audio host. So I recommend Libsyn, Libsyn. You can get a Libsyn account for as little as $5 a month. And it goes up from there depending on how many stats you want and bells and whistles and that sort of thing. So if you have your audio host and you have your recording equipment with your microphone, your computer, and your headphones, you're pretty much ready to go. You can publish your episode this week. Matter of fact, if you want to get an account over at Libsyn, if you use the coupon code PTC, which stands for Podcast Talent Coach, you can get your first month for free over there at Libsyn, Libsyn.com. So creating a podcast looks pretty daunting from the outside, but once you get in, it's not that difficult at all.
Yeah, I've found that. I've actually, for the listeners, I've actually done Erik's 6-week launching podcast program, and yeah, I'm 4 or 5 episodes into my podcast now after completing that course, and I'm producing that weekly, and it takes me about half a day at the absolute most to do a recording, edit it in Audacity, and then upload it to Libsyn. And it's as
as you
simple as
get into
click,
that,
click,
Greg,
click.
as you get further into it, that time will probably shrink in half, because right now you're only 5 or 6 episodes in, so it's still kind of new. It's still a little clunky. And then once you get refined in your process, you'll find that time shrink down, and you'll get it done in no time. You're doing great work, and a lot of people go out and they try and figure out how to podcast by watching YouTube videos or reading websites and such. And there's a million ways to create a podcast. And if you try and combine them all, you're going to get confused. What I recommend is figure out one person that's done it and learn from that person and just stick with that path. Don't try to combine 27 different ways to do it, because you're just going to get confused and you're going to struggle and things aren't going to work right. And then you're going to give up. So pick a path, stick with that, and you'll be just fine.
And in that, Erik, when you were explaining how to set up a podcast, you mentioned microphones.
Yeah.
Now, for the listeners, especially those that will be watching this on video, they may notice that you have a boom mic, what's called a boom mic.
Yep.
And I'm wearing a headset. So can you explain for the listeners what's the difference in microphones?
Yeah, so you'll hear a little difference in my microphone compared to Greg's microphone. Greg's microphone doesn't have quite the high end and low end that an external microphone will have because of the headset. The microphone's smaller, so the pickup mechanism inside the microphone is a little smaller, and it gives you a limited bandwidth of the audio that it picks up, but it still sounds fairly clean. And he's right on the mic. He's not popping his peas. A lot of times when people get headset mics, they get those that sit right in front of the mouth, and the plosives attack that microphone, and you hear the popping peas and that sort of thing in the breath. And that's what you want to try and avoid with a good headset mic. But if you get a good headset mic, they're quality, and you can get a quality audio out of them. Boom arm will hold your microphone. So this is a $75 microphone that I talked about. This is from Audio Technica. It's an ATR 2100. Samson, Samson, also creates They have a fantastic USB microphone that you can get as well. And both of those plug right into your computer. So there's just a little different diaphragm inside the microphone that picks up the audio, and it just makes the audio a little bit broader. Now, if I went up from this and I bought like a $4,000 microphone, it would sound a whole lot better than what this one sounds. I could take the next step and maybe buy a $500 Electro Voice microphone, and it would sound better than this one because it would just have more mechanics inside the microphone and a better diaphragm, better pickup, and that sort of thing. So I would not recommend a low end microphone. Like a lot of people want to get the Blue Yeti. The Blue Yeti is a decent microphone, but it's designed to sit in the middle of a table and pick up everybody sitting around the table. And so it picks up a lot of room noise. If you don't have the Blue Yeti set up just right, you're not going to get good audio quality out of it. It's a good microphone if you know how to use it and if you know how to set it up properly. So make sure you're taking advice from somebody who knows what they're talking about when it comes to buying your microphone. It makes it super easy. Tavana Denise came to me to launch her podcast, and she's like, I want to launch it, but I'm a little freaked out. There's a lot of information on the internet. I don't know where to go and where to turn. And I walked her through the steps that I walked you through, Greg. And it took us 4 weeks to get her show up and running. We did it in 30 days. And she said, man, this was a lot easier than I thought it was going to be. She actually was a nurse, and she got out of nursing and started her own business. And as soon as she did, all of these other nurses came to her and said, how did you do it? Help me escape. They all wanted to get out of nursing and go do something else. So she started coaching all of these nurses on how to find their next thing, how to launch their next thing. And she uses her podcast to tell those stories and talk about what's possible, what the transformation could be if you made that transition out of nursing into something else. And she invites those women to a round table that she holds. And when they get to the round table and they see a transformation at the round table, then she invites them to her one-on-one coaching or her mastermind, which is her paid program. And she makes money there. It's a great marketing tool to build a relationship with your audience so they want to do business with you.
So starting to sort of try and wrap all this up, because I am aware of your time and it must be getting very late over there.
It's getting there.
It's getting there. Yeah. Look, people are getting very interested now about the podcast. You've pricked their ears. They know what a podcast is now. Why should somebody in the disability sector who's just saying, all I want is more clients, and to grow my business, why should I launch a podcast?
A podcast is a great way to build a relationship with your audience. A lot of people say, oh, should I podcast or should I be on YouTube? Well, ideally, you should be on both if you can. YouTube is a fantastic search engine. It will get you discovered, but it won't build the relationship like audio will. When you're listening to a podcast, you're typically listening in earbuds or you're driving in your car by yourself, and that podcast is your companion. So you're not having to exercise alone or not having to mow the yard by yourself or drive in the car alone. That podcast is there, and that's your companion. That's your friend. And that's how you build that relationship and that know, like, and trust. So when you're trying to get more clients, you're telling the story, you're talking about the transformation that's possible, and then you're leading people to the next step of doing business with you. Oscar Trimboli was one of my clients. He is from Australia. He runs a podcast that's called Deep Listening, Impact Beyond Words. And Oscar helps type A personalities, CEOs, leaders be better listeners, because as a leader, we like to talk a lot. So he helps us be better listeners. Well, the first season of his episode, Oscar's a great listener and he interviews people tremendously well. But he came to me and he said, I've done 30 episodes. It's not doing anything to grow my business. Can you help me? And I listened to his show and I said, Oscar, you're doing a great job listening and you're doing a great job interviewing these people, but you're not revealing anything to me. You're not telling me anything about you. I don't know what you do. I don't know who you are. I don't know much about you because you're so engaged in interviewing your guests. Tell me more about you. So in season 2, we pivoted his show a little bit and we incorporated more of Oscar into the show. He started telling his story, why he does what he does, who he helps, why he helps them do it, why it's so important to him to do that. He's published a couple books now. He's become a best-selling author. Apple Podcasts Australia named him one of the top 10 podcasts in his niche for the entire year. And it's really starting to bring in more clients for him. He's getting more speaking opportunities as a keynote speaker. And it's really done tremendous things to grow his business because he's making that meaningful connection with his audience. And that's what providers can do when you're looking for more clients. You're able to tell your story of transformation, tell your story of who you've helped, what you've helped them do, and more importantly, why you've helped them do it. And when they learn about you and how you operate, what you believe and what you value, that's when people will decide to come and work with you. So much more than a 30-second television commercial or a 60-second radio commercial or a print ad in the newspaper will ever communicate. You and your voice can communicate your message on a podcast and tell your audience exactly why they should work with you and the transformation they're going to experience by coming through your program. That's what a podcast can do for you. And that's why I encourage all businesses to use podcasting to their full advantage to create relationships that will be powerful and profitable.
Yeah, you raise an interesting point here, which is something that I've labored on intensely right through this whole entire podcast series, is it's not about you. There has in the industry, there's been this big us and them mentality. And I've noticed over the last 6 months or so that that's actually starting to change now, where providers are all wanting to actually work together to better the lives of the people they're trying to help. And yeah, it's something that providers, I don't know why, but they seem to struggle with this us and them mentality. It's, oh, but if I don't, if and I tell them all the time when I meet with them, I go, no, it's not about you. It's about the person you're trying to help.
Absolutely. I just recently had some car issues and I'd taken it to 3 different dealerships and I wasn't getting any help. So finally, I took it to a guy that I had worked with probably 6 years ago. And he said, I'll look at the car and I'll tell you what it needs. And more importantly, I'll tell you what it doesn't need. I'm not here to take your money. I'm here to help you get your car fixed. And if I can't help you fix it, I will tell you who can. And I paid that guy $500 more than I would have paid another guy to fix my car because that's the guy I have a relationship with now. And that's the guy I can trust because he's out to serve me first. He's not out just to get my money.
Yeah. So how this is all great. I'm starting to love the idea of podcasts. I'm a provider. You've tweaked my interest. You've got me really interested in this whole podcast thing now. I can actually go and, between jobs and on my way to work and on my way home from work, I'll be, instead of listening to radio or being frustrated, stuck in traffic, I can listen to my favorite podcast now. So how do I don't want to actually do that myself. It seems like such a lot of work to get a podcast started up. How do I get on someone else's podcast?
Oh, actually, it's a great way to market yourself as being on other podcasts as well. What I recommend to get on other podcasts is open your favorite podcast player and go into your niche and find shows that are already speaking to your ideal target customer. Who are you trying to reach? And then figure out which shows already have the attention of those people. Then you want to check a couple things. Make sure they're already or they're currently publishing new episodes. So many podcasts have fade. There are about 4 million podcasts out right now. Half of those aren't currently publishing new episodes. So make sure they're publishing current episodes. And then second, make sure they actually interview people. I didn't interview anybody for the first 275 episodes of my show, yet I got emails every week saying, hey, I would be a great guest for your show. And I'd say, really? Because I don't interview guests. It's just me. And so make sure they interview people, make sure they're currently publishing new episodes. If that's the case, listen to a little bit of an episode, get a feel for it, get a feel for what they do, and then shoot them an email and say, hey, Greg, I listened to your last episode where you interviewed Erik. I loved the part where you talked about the 6 steps of launching a podcast. I thought that was fantastic. It looks like you and I serve the same sort of audience. What does it take to be a guest on your podcast? And then let them tell you what they're looking for. So you can then say, great, because that's what I do. Here's how. And you can describe how you're a guest for their show. So many people reach out and they go, hey, Greg, I'd be a great guest for your show. I could talk about my book and my course and my program and all of this stuff. And you're like, yeah, but that's not what I do on my show. Like, that assumes I know your goal with your podcast. But when you reach out and you say, Greg, I love the show, I love that part, that shows I listen to the show and I know something about it. And then I say, what does it take to be a guest on your show? Now I'm letting you tell me how to qualify myself rather than me assuming I already know. And then that opens the dialogue. And then you can figure out whether or not you qualify to be a guest on the show.
Yeah, it all comes back to that stop being all things to all men mentality that seems to be in the industry here in Australia. It's like, but I've got to serve everybody.
If you're trying to please everybody, you're going to please nobody, because you're not going to be perfect for anybody. If I try to please 2 people, I'm going to be milquetoast for both of them. I'm going to serve them, but not perfectly. But if I pick one and I super serve that one, so it's ideal for that person, I'm still okay in serving the other one. I'm not perfect for the number 2, but I'm perfect for the number 1. I'm in a much better position than if I try and halfway serve both of them. So know your ideal target listener, your ideal client, and then find the people already speaking into their lives.
So I've got my target audience sorted out. I've got my equipment set up. I'm pretty au fait, confident now on how to use it. How often should I release a podcast episode?
Probably weekly. Weekly is a good cadence for 2 reasons. One, people are normally scheduling their life around the week. What are you doing on Saturday? Every Monday, I do this. Every Thursday, the kids have soccer practice. Every Saturday, we go to the pool. Every Sunday, we're going to church. We're set on a weekly cycle. So weekly is good for that. And weekly is also good because we can keep up with it. You mentioned it takes you a few hours to publish an episode. Imagine if you're trying to do that every day, you wouldn't have time to do anything else. But if it's every other week or once a month, people forget about your show and they forget why they listen, and they're not building that relationship with you. So I recommend starting out once a week. If you want to crank it up to twice a week, you can do that after you get a feel for what it's like to publish the show every week. But I wouldn't do less than once a week. I wouldn't do every other week or once a month, because it's difficult to build the relationship with your audience. Be consistent.
I wouldn't even do more than once a week.
It's a challenge.
The work that's gone into actually producing this podcast on a weekly basis. When I first launched this earlier this year, I was actually doing a monthly podcast, and then I decided to change it to weekly after having done your course. And I record one episode, upload that, it goes live, edit it, put that up, it goes live, and then it seems like the next day or a couple of days later, I'm like, oh, holy hell, I've got to record another episode.
So what I like to do is I like to batch my work. The problem with the podcast is that it takes different parts of the brain. So it takes one part to be creative and have this conversation that you and I are having right now. And then it takes that analytical part of the brain to get in there and do the detailed work of the editing and publishing and posting. And then it takes another creative side of the brain to go out and create publicity and promote the show. So rather than trying to do all of that at the same time and your brain's going back and forth, chunk it together. So if you're going to do an interview style show, what I would recommend is line up 3 or 4 interviews back to back. So you block out maybe one morning a month where you crank out 4 interviews, and those interviews are done. And now all you need to do is sit down and edit them and publish them. And you can do all of that and schedule them to come out. So maybe you set aside an entire day once a month to create all of your content. So you're not doing it all the time every week. Create a system where you can sit down, because it takes time to set up the computer, set up the microphone, get the headphones on, make sure the audio recording software is working and all of that. If you do that one time and then record 4 episodes, you just saved a whole chunk of time.
And also it allows for if issues come up, like we had some issues trying to connect this morning.
Yeah.
I was just going to mention that we're actually recording this podcast in the morning here in Australia, and it's evening for you over there where you are.
It is.
And yes, we've had some issues in trying to get that happening today. So when you talk about batching and actually rolling episodes on an episode, it sort of cuts. You don't actually have to go through that with every single episode that you're recording if you're just going to record them all.
Yeah, once you get the problem solved, then you just keep moving to the next one. Makes it super easy.
Yeah, exactly. So in wrapping all this up, is there anything else that people within the disability space or the NDIS should know if they're wanting to go out and launch their podcast tomorrow?
It is a great way for you to let your prospective clients know exactly what you do. There's no better way. Rick Sizemore came to me. Rick's the director of the Virginia Workforce Rehabilitation Center in Virginia here in the United States. And they help people find new careers once they've sustained an injury. So maybe they were a construction worker and lost a hand in a horrific accident. They can't do construction anymore because they're missing a hand. So the Workforce Rehabilitation Center not only helps them rehab physically, but they also help them rehab and find new work and get out and create a new career. And on his podcast, he'll interview clients that the Workforce Rehabilitation Center helps, and then he'll interview businesses that have hired people from the Workforce Rehabilitation Center. So if Jim comes into the rehabilitation center and then gets hired by Acme Brick Company, he would interview Jim, and then he would interview somebody from Acme Brick Company to show the transformation that's possible through his organization. That's what a podcast can do for your organization. When you're trying to reach those clients and show them how you can help them, a podcast is a fantastic way to tell your story, and I highly recommend you get started today.
Erik, on that, how can people actually get started today? Our listeners are really super pumped to actually start their podcast. How can listeners work with you to get their podcast started if they're feeling a bit overwhelmed about all this?
Oh, absolutely. I have a course where I walk people through. It's called the Podcast Fast Blueprint, where I sit down and I take your hand and I walk you through every step of the way. But to get started, you can get started for free if you go to podcasttalentcoach.com/launch. I have a free little mini course over there. It's a checklist that shows you exactly what needs to be done to launch your podcast. I have a video there that will walk you through that entire checklist to show you how you can do it quickly, easily, and inexpensively. So if you go to podcasttalentcoach.com/launch, you can download that for free. and it'll show you exactly how to launch. And then if you want to discuss getting some help from me to launch your show, that's all in that mini course as well. It'll tell you exactly how to reach out to me and how we might work together to launch your show.
Fantastic. And if you're having trouble trying to find that, you can always go to our website at Hassle Free Marketing Solutions. It's www.hasslefreemarketing.com.au, and scroll down and you'll see a photo of Erik there. You can click on that link and it'll allow you to book directly with Erik. Thanks for your time, Erik. This has been absolutely fantastic. And thanks again. Is there any last words that you would like to for our listeners?
There's no time like now. If you don't start today and you always put it off to tomorrow, you're going to miss out on great opportunities. So get started today. Greg, it was great catching up with you. Always good to see you. And thanks for having me today.
If you'd like to know more about marketing your NDIS business and services to your ideal clients, then head to www.hasslefreemarketing.com.au, where you'll find a bunch of marketing options to suit every budget. Register your email address at the bottom of the homepage to receive our list of 101 ways to market your NDIS services. I've thoroughly enjoyed helping NDIS providers identify their target market and help them implement marketing strategies that will grow their business and strengthen the NDIS community as a whole. So if you're struggling with your marketing strategy, reach out to me by email, greg@hasslefreemarketing.com.au, to book a strategy call. You'll also find more about our services, and don't forget to download our 101 ways to market your business from the bottom of the homepage.